Hello, everyone. Blah, blah, blah. And I'm keeping that part too, right? Hello, everyone, and welcome to the And I Thought podcast. I have started calling it by its actual name because people kept, before I would call it something else, and people were like, I can never find it. And I was like, because that's not the name of the show. And so they would be like, well, why don't you call it by its name? And I'm like, it doesn't sound nearly as cool. And then I thought about it, which is funny because, all that time during COVID, I never thought about it. But after COVID, when, I got real busy and had to do everything again, I went, I should name it after the show. 3 years wasted. And then I went on. And oh my God, I remember to introduce myself. Okay, back to being professional. May that never be me. But I'm one of the And I Thought ladies. And the And I Thought ladies write the And I Thought books. Go figure. Out of everything we could do, writing books that have the title And I Thought. Hard to figure out why. But there are, and I thought divorce was bad, and I thought being grown up was easy. If only I were me, a memoir in verse, Foreign Coffee, Widow's Web, and Widow's Death. And if you were counting along, that is 6 books, 6 audiobooks. So you can get those audiobooks wherever audiobooks are found. And there's a Jade that's not too far away from off camera. And she's like, don't forget to say literary life guides. So our books are literary life guides, otherwise known as anthologies. Shh, don't tell anyone I said anthologies. Yes, I said anthologies, whatever. So literary life guides is officially what they are. And you can get the rest of those 12 literary life guides at www.andithoughladies.com. And just in case you're not doing math today, just, word sentences, yeah, I'm sticking with the word sentences. 12 books and 6 books equals 18 books total. I lied. We have 2 more books out. So it's 20. You can buy all of those 20 books at that aforementioned website. Okay, that's enough of me chattering. Although I am loving my narcissist self today with the curls. Oh, because you know me, I'll talk about me all day. And it'll be a great show. Absolutely spectacular. My narcissism must say that. But you're here to hear about our guest. Wonderful guest. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much for the interview, for the invitation. I am Matty Dalrymple. I write the Ann Kinnear Suspense Novels and Suspense Shorts and the Lizzy Ballard Thrillers. And I also write, speak, podcast, and consult on the writing craft and the publishing voyage as the Indy Author.
Okay, I'm like, should I start with the writing? But I'm going to start with the podcast because
Okay.
I'm a sucker for a podcast. Sorry.
I do like talking podcasts with other podcasters, having like meta conversations about podcasting.
Oh, dude, I should just what can you teach me about podcasting? That should be the first question.
Yeah, well, I collected everything that I knew about podcasting in a book. So I have a book called The Indy Author's Guide to Podcasting for Authors. And I based it on now over 200 episodes of the Indy Author podcast, which is now a weekly podcast. And I started that in 2016, largely as an excuse to talk to other people in my writers group about their areas of expertise. And then when I left my corporate job in 2019, I was finally able to take it to a more regular schedule. It was very sporadic before then. I went bi-weekly in 2019, and in 2020, I went weekly. So I think just today, I put out episode 216, 217, one of those. And I love it. I think podcasts are a fantastic way of reaching people, as I suspect you agree, considering you have a podcast. And I collected what I knew in that book, everything from the most strategic advice. Basically, should the reader start a podcast? Because there's this anecdotal statistic out there that I was never able to confirm, but the statistic is that 70% of podcasts that start never get past 7 episodes, which I wasn't able to confirm, but feels right to me. And you don't want to put all that effort into something if you can't really sustain it. So I ask some questions early in the book to help people think about whether a podcast is something they can sustain, right through to, like, how do you improve your lighting? How do you improve your technical platforms? So I try to cover the whole gamut of what people might wonder about podcasts for authors.
That is amazing. I love the fact that you put all the knowledge together in one book. That's just perfect. And I have to know that I assume that your writing group just absolutely adores the fact that if they want to start it, it's there. And then the expert behind it, and they can ask questions.
Yeah. Well, it was nice to have those excuses to talk to people about topics like how to do an author reading or the benefits of co-op publishers or how to reach media outlets, and then kind of pay it forward by providing them with some audio and video resources as a thank you for having spent that time with me.
Isn't it amazing how much you actually learn? Like,
Yeah.
people come and then you're like, I'm the host. And you're like, well, no, I'm the student.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I think the joke I make is everybody can tell whatever I'm struggling with in my either writing or publishing life because that's the topic that I'm going to be finding a guest to talk about.
Oh my God, I don't feel so bad now. I'm like, am I a terrible person? Because every time I want to know something, I'm like, you know what we should do? Interview someone who does this. Well,
Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to find guests.
I mean, first you research and you do the whole Google thing, and then you
Yeah,
get the books, and you're like, let me interview someone who knows what they're doing. Because
yeah,
I feel like you
exactly.
can't get enough from like just the books. Anyway, we have talked about podcasts. We need to talk about your books, madam. That's what we need to talk about. You're
Cool.
here for that.
I always love to do that. Well, I already mentioned one of my two nonfiction books. The other nonfiction book I have is called Taking the Short Tack, Creating Income and Connecting with Readers Using Short Fiction. I co-wrote that with Mark Leslie Lefebvre of, among other things, the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. And in addition to those two nonfiction books, I have 9, soon to be 10 fiction books in 2 series. One is the Ann Kinnear Suspense Novels, and one is the Lizzy Ballard Thrillers. The 4th Lizzy Ballard book is coming out next month in January 2027. And the common theme is what happens when an extraordinary ability transforms an ordinary life. And so the extraordinary ability in the case of Ann Kinnear is that she can communicate with the dead, and that gets her into all sorts of dicey situations. And Lizzy Ballard, who is a young girl at the beginning of the first book, but is 16 or 17 years old through most of the series, has a different extraordinary ability, which I can't really tell because it would be a bit of a spoiler for the first book. But she also is living in a world where everything's like the lives we know, except one thing is tweaked. I like that about books when everything is normal, but they've just tweaked one thing.
Isn't that a little hard to pull off? Like, I've always thought in my mind it was really kind of hard to pull off. But I might
Well,
be on that. Like, I write poetry, for crying out loud.
well, I think it all depends on the execution. I think that if you set up that one thing realistically in the context of the rest of the world you're putting the characters in, it can be done. And I guess that, if you took an extraordinary ability that was being able to fly and you put it in the ordinary world, I think that would be hard to pull off because it feels too disconnected from the ordinary world. But I think that if you take something that does exist in the ordinary world and you exaggerate it. So, there's certainly people, I've spoken to many people like at book clubs that I've been invited to who have had experiences where they have had some interaction with spirits. Maybe a relative who's passed on has visited them. And so it's not so completely out of the realm of our normal lives. It's just sort of kicked up a notch in order to make it more immediate for the reader, more engaging for the reader.
That is great. Like, I guess it would be easier than developing the entire new world, like they do in sci-fi and fantasy. But like, I've always like when I read sci-fi and fantasy, you start off with this is a new world, but when you read something like that, I'm always in awe. I'm like, how does this author like encapsulate the real world that we're in and any social commentary that they'd like to make, and still make me be thoroughly fascinated with this one unique fact. Like it just pulls me through the
Yeah.
whole. I'm like,
Well,
I
the
would
whole
never
yeah,
do it.
the whole building a whole world, that's what seems foreign to me. So I think we all bring our strengths. Like if someone just gave me a blank world slate and said start from scratch, I think I would be stumped. So it just all depends on how your brain works.
I think so. I think it's also amazing that like either of us, we make things out of thin air. Now, what is your process of making things out of thin air, otherwise known as writing?
Well, for my uh first book, which is called The Sense of Death, trying to see if I have it. I won't take the time to pick a copy of it up. But my first book is the first book in the Ann Kinnear Suspense Novels. It's called The Sense of Death. And for many years, I had this scene in my head that played out like I was watching a movie. It was about a woman who goes to this old, at the time, Victorian house in San Francisco, and she's there to do a job. She's there on a professional engagement, and her reaction to being at the house is so dramatic that she can't go in, and she has an argument with her client. And the job that she is there to do, it's Ann Kinnear, who can communicate with the dead. She has a consulting business that's run by her brother based on that ability. All these details came up a bit later. And she's there with a client who's hired her to walk through the house to see if it's haunted, because this woman's thinking of buying the house, and she, in fact, in this case, wants to find a haunted house. So she's hired Ann to help her find a haunted house. And I just played that scene through in my brain over and over and over and over again, like refining it each time. And eventually it got to the point where I just felt like I needed to find out what the rest of the story was around it. So I had to come up with a story that led up to that moment and come up with a story that led away from that moment, which was very, very inefficient. I don't do that anymore as much, but oftentimes I am intrigued by a topic because there is this one scene that I'm seeing very clearly in my mind, like a movie playing out.
Okay, so it's not just like, when you're writing a book, you're always kind of by yourself with your own head, and you're writing the characters, and you're like, does anyone else write like this? Okay, great. It's not the only, we're not the
Yeah.
only.
I
Yeah.
think the more I find out about, the more I have the opportunity to talk to writers about their writing process, the more I realize that once you get into the nuances, it is really different for different people, really different. Like there's a lot of commonality, but a lot of times I'll talk to people and I'll hear how they come up with stories. And I'm like, really? And that works for you? But yeah, that's how it works for me.
I'm always amazed with the characters that people come up with and the nuances to their personality.
Yeah.
Because like, these people are so, so believable. Okay. We have talked about the books a bit, but I have to jump ship and go ahead and talk about you are an indie author.
Yep.
How did you choose being an indie author? Because your books sound amazing. Did you try to do the tradition? Did you try knocking on all the doors, or did you just like, I'm jumping straight in?
Yeah, I pretty much jumped straight in. So I wrote my first book. Actually, I just had my 10-year anniversary of when my first book came out. And when I was finishing up that book in 2013, so it came out at the end of 2013. And when I was finishing up that book, I went to this writers group that was the impetus for my podcast. And there were a couple of traditionally published writers there. So I started saying to them, well, what are you getting out of your relationship with a traditional publisher? And although I didn't, it was a different world because not only did I really not know what was going on either side, I was just asking people who did know for their opinion. And I didn't have it worked out in quite this carefully. It took me many years to think about it in this way. But what I heard from them is that you get the A and the B from traditional publishers. So access in the sense that certainly at the time, if I wanted to see my books on a shelf in Barnes and Noble, I was much more likely to have that happen if I went the traditional route. And bragging rights, because it's super cool to be able to say that your book's been picked up by, whoever, the big five, the big four, however many bigs there are at the moment. Um, but that against that are the 3 or 4 C's of independent publishing, depending on how you count them. So creativity, I never have to be creative on someone else's schedule. Control, I'm never going to have a book cover I hate. Um, Care, by which I mean that I don't think any traditional publisher would still be heavily promoting a book that was 10 years old, but I still promote my first book more so than any others because I'm hoping it will lead people into a series. And I can take care of my backlist in a way that a traditional publisher would not. And then I was saying this to a guest on a podcast and they said, and cash, because of course there are going to be some people who are going to hit pay dirt and get a highly lucrative, very generous traditional publishing deal, but it's a small, small, small percentage. And so the idea of earning a smaller amount over the whole rest of my life was much more appealing to me than like a big payday in an advance that might never even earn out. So yeah, I pretty much picked indie right from the get-go.
I'm I have heard so many why indie, why traditional. I have to say this is the most organized indie argument I have ever had. Are you on a debate team for this? Should I know if you have
I've talked
resources
about
on
this
the
a lot.
side and the card?
As you can imagine, as someone who has a podcast called the Indy Author Podcast, I do talk about this topic a lot. So I've had a long time to refine my the thoughts behind it.
I was like, I was about to talk about me for a second, and I forgot. As a narcissist, this is not an interview about me. But I should ask,
No,
can I get
please.
interviewed on your show so I can be the proper narcissist? No, I'm joking. I'm joking about that. I noticed that one of the that you and oh my God, I forgot his name, and I wrote it down. Like I literally wrote it down. Hold on, let me look it up again. Dale L. Roberts. There we go. I was about to call him David Lee, and that's so far off from the name. That you guys talked about the 48-hour book.
Yes.
How did that go?
Well, we didn't actually get into a ton of detail about it because that interview, which just came out yesterday, I think, so you're really on top of things. So Dale has been on my podcast several times, and so there are communications that I make to the past podcast guests, and one of the things I offer is that if they have a new book coming out, I have another video series called What I Learned. And I ask authors 2 questions related to their latest book. What did they learn that they would like to share with their fellow writers? And what did they learn that they would like to share with their fellow readers? And so Dale had actually wanted to talk about how to write a book in 48 hours as part of the What I Learned series. So we didn't actually delve into how to write a book in 48 hours as much as we might otherwise have, other than just the fact that it's a bizarre thought for someone who spends, 9 to 12 months writing a novel, or probably an equivalent amount of time writing a nonfiction book. So, but it's always super fun to talk with Dale. So that was a fun conversation.
He has an amazing, he just makes amazing content. But
Yeah.
I feel like most people know that, especially we're indie authors, we've run across it.
Yeah, exactly.
I was going to say that, like, I don't know if they still do it, but Canada used to have the 72-hour novel contest. And I used to do it every year.
Really?
Did it every
What's
year.
that about? You really write a novel in 72
You have to
hours?
write a complete and total novel in 3 days.
Yikesy.
Turn it in.
How'd you do?
I wrote so every year I would come out, like I would be like, oh, I want to write a novel, I want to write a novel. And then I was like, screw it, I'll just wait for the 3-day contest and I would just write my novel then. And that was the novel for the year.
Well, that's very impressive. That's
Yeah.
something I wouldn't even try.
I was very familiar with the characters. Very familiar. I have been writing with them since I was 12 years old. So
Oh, that would help.
yeah, it helps a lot because you already know the setting, you know the theme, you know exactly what they're gonna say, what they're gonna
Yeah.
do. And I mean, before the 72 hours get there, you've thought about pretty much that. You have the mental outline in your head and you just roll what comes out. That's
Yeah.
it. Whatever comes out, and when I'm done, I'm done. That's
Yeah, I don't even do NaNoWriMo, so 3 days seems like insanity, but good for you.
and they used to offer a publishing contract, so you could get traditionally published at the end of that. So you
Oh my
literally put
goodness.
it in to for a shot at getting published.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Very
people won
interesting.
every year, so that was kind of cool.
Yeah, that is kind of cool.
I'm wishing they would do it in the United States. I would really appreciate watching these people, and I feel like
Yeah.
we should televise it because they televised it for 2 years in a row in Canada. They should do it. I want to see it. I want to see it very, very badly.
So do they actually show people writing, or is it televised like an award ceremony, or what part is televised?
No, it was for 2 years it was televised on Canadian television where the authors that were selected sat in a library. They had all the snacks and everything and sleeping bags, and they just wrote a book.
It's like Survival, or what is Survivor? It's like the reality TV show for writers.
Exactly. I was like, this is amazing. Y'all should bring this here. Really should bring this here. Just staying. They had all this coffee. It was great. Of course, I was that year I was at home writing, and you have to give proof that it was done in 72 hours. But as soon as it was done, I watched it and I went, oh, you poor people.
My
Oh, God,
goodness. Yeah.
they do that.
It does sound horrible. I'm sure some people would be energized by that, but I just think it sounds horrible.
But they
I
were
would
like
have I would have
bunch of other
writer's
people.
block for 3 days. And then on day 4, I'd be like, oh, I have a good idea.
And so I can see that happening to so many people. Oh my goodness. I was gonna talk about me again, and then I was like, no. But I am gonna
Please
say
do.
one quick thing. And that is actually how one of the reasons that we did the author reality show, where we offered the writer's contract at the end, the publishing contract at the end. And I'm going to tell you, all my authors, they had 4 weeks to present 4 different like sections of writing the book to like actual traditional publishing houses, like small press, CEOs of small press. And they were like, it was horrible. I don't know how I got started, and the writing every week, and it just takes over. And I was like, how? And then but they explained it, and I was like, oh, so it's like writing a book in 3 days. Got it.
Except
Oh,
much,
never do
much
it that
longer.
way again. Got weeks. All right, done with my stories.
That was an interesting story.
What was one of your favorite moments on doing your podcast, like when you're talking to a guest or something? What was like the favorite moment you've ever had?
Um, I think 2 favorite moments have been opportunities I've had, and I hate to mention any because I could say this about many, many, many of the episodes, but the 2 that always pop into my mind are that I'm a huge fan of Ben Winters. So he wrote The Last Policeman and Underground Airlines, Golden State, The Quiet Boy, other books whose names are escaping me at the moment. And I love his books, and um I invited him on the podcast and he came on. So I got to chat with one of my favorite authors. That was called The Bothness of Compelling Characters. So we talked about how um, bad characters are really only engaging if there's a glimmer of good in them, and good characters are only engaging if they have a dark side as well. And then the other one that was equally fun is that I read a book called S. It was written by the co-authors were J.J. Abrams, of J.J. Abrams, and Doug
Mhm.
Dorst. And I loved the book. It was one of these books. It was like an experiential book in the sense that it was a physical book that, I mean, you can get it in ebook, but I don't know why you'd want to, and you'll understand when I describe it. It's a book that looks like a 1950s hardcover book with like the embossed cover, and it comes in like a nice slip case, and you open it up and there's a like stamps like it's been checked out of the library, and then you start turning the pages, and in the margins of the book are messages written. And so as you read through the notes in the margins, it's clear that one person has taken the book out of the library and written a note, and then someone else took the book out of the library and wrote a response. And then it's this whole conversation between these two, as it turns out, like a college student and a graduate student who are exchanging messages. So there's the story in the book, which Doug Dorst wrote. There's the story of the two people who are talking in the margins, and then there's a third story that is the translator, the ostensible translator of the book, who's making comments and footnotes about the material that she's translated. And you'd like turn the page and there would be a postcard stuck in it with notes on it. It was fascinating. And I got to talk to Doug Dorst about that whole experience. And it was so much fun to have experienced that book and then be able to talk to the author about it. So I think just that opportunity a podcast gives you to talk to people that you probably would never, ever in any other circumstance get a chance to talk to has really been, some of the highlights of my experience.
I think that's the most fun of. I think that's the most fun about having a show.
Yes.
You often you said that you talk to people and you're like, oh, here, this is how you could set up a podcast. Normally, people go, oh, I have a book. What should I do next? I'm like a podcast, and they're like, why? I'm like, because I feel like it's a college course that you will never, ever, ever get unless you do it.
Yeah.
I'm like, they're like, but
Yeah.
it's like all the stuff I should learn. I was like, just start off real simple and then you can learn that, but you can also learn so many other things in between. I mean, as you said, like
Yeah.
getting to talk to your favorite authors or your favorite screenwriters, producers about how did this work? And honestly, the way it informs your own writing,
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything better. There must
Yeah.
be. I mean, you have you have better guests than we do. So
I think all guests are good. They're just different. Like I've really been surprised. I mean, I suppose I have been surprised in a negative way. I can't think of any circumstances at the moment, but I've certainly had spoken to people where I was like, "Oh, this is going to be a nice little conversation," and it was just fabulous. So, um, it's just super fun to have that kind of opportunity.
so what advice would you give any author that is thinking about doing long-standing series and going to have a backlist? What
Yeah,
advice?
I think just never to lose track of that. I think two things that spring to mind. One is I'm going to say something that I every first time author hears and nobody wants to hear it, and I didn't want to hear it when I was a first time author, but it's true that um you're never going to make a living on one book. If you do, it's like winning the Powerball. Every once in a while I'll say that to someone, they'll say, "Well, what about so and so?" And I was like, "Yeah, but that's like the Powerball." You don't want to go to your financial planner and say, "You know what my retirement plan is? The Powerball." No, like because although it's possible, it's not likely. And so um I think that when you've written your first book, then the most important thing to do is write your second book if you want to have it as a career. As opposed to like a project of your heart, which is also perfectly fine, but isn't going to pay the mortgage. Um, so I think that in when you're early in your author career, and if you think you're going to be writing a series, then I think writing the series is the important thing. Like just write books until you have three or four or five, and then really dive into the marketing and the promotion. And then never forget those first books because with series, what you want to do is get people in early so they can read through the whole thing, and that's both most satisfying for them and most financially beneficial for you if you could do that.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much for that information because I don't think I've ever asked about what you should do with a backlist before. So this is new information for me.
Oh, good.
That might be because I mean, what's a backlist of poetry? More poetry.
Yeah, poetry is a very different beast, I'm sure, and one that I don't have a lot of experience with myself, so I don't know how that would translate into the poetry world. I'm sure there's some truth to it, but I think it would play out very differently, would be
Yeah,
my guess.
it's interesting. So I wanted to ask one question before I left because this actually would be the time I would wrap it up and call it quits. But then I heard earlier that you had a job at 2019 and you let it go, and I'm assuming it was for a creative career. If it's not, just tell me I'm dead wrong.
No, I worked as a project manager largely in IT for many, many years. And I worked for QVC. And in 2019, leading up to 2019, even since then, they were doing a lot of restructuring, and they restructured the department I was in. They eliminated the job I had, and I had an opportunity to apply for another job that I didn't want or take a severance package. And I was like, you know what? This is the easiest decision of my entire life. And it was really great because it gave me some runway. I mean, I don't want to badmouth my corporate life because it gave me many, many good things, and I'm not one of these people who was like miserable in her day job. But it was great to be able to leave there with some with a package that gave me some runway and be able to do writing and publishing and podcasting full time.
Ooh, I lied. I thought that was the last question. You said publishing. Can you tell us what you learned about publishing? And then that is the last question before we wrap this up.
Well, I think I'll use the reference to having been a project manager for many years that there were many lessons that I took from my years managing IT projects or facilities projects or logistics projects or the various projects I managed that I am now able to apply to my publishing arm. So I have an imprint called William Kingsfield Publishers, which was named and as an homage to my father, who was a short story writer. He got some stories published back in the 50s in Collier's and Cosmopolitan and some other sort of prestigious magazines. And yeah, so he would have been thrilled to know that I was a full-time writer and publisher. So I named my imprint after him. And Yeah, I think that what I'll say about the publishing business is that indie authors have to be willing to wear two hats. They have to be able to wear their creative hat, and maybe three hats: the creative hat, the editorial hat, and then the business person hat. And if you're looking to have a successful indie author career, then you need to be able to switch those three hats off as on and off as needed.
I completely and totally agree. And I just want to say that for anyone out there who's made it all the way through to this section of the interview, it is so much fun switching hats. Like
Yes.
everyone goes, "Oh, I just want to write." Like, but do you know how much fun it is to be like creative in marketing too? And do you know how much fun it is to like do the business side of bookkeeping? Like this is like you got to have the fun writing. Now you get to be imaginative about how you're going to make people notice your writing, and now you get to count your money because you were creative in the first place.
I think that is a great, great perspective because I think you're absolutely right. People think of that as like the drudge work that you have to do. And I love that you're bringing like the same enthusiasm to all three of those hats.
It's a blast and a half. But
Yeah.
then again, this is what I wanted to do since I was 7 years old. So maybe it's just a blast and a half to me. I want to thank you so much for being here today and for
Thank you
taking
so much
the
for the
time out.
invitation.
Can you tell people where to find out more about you and what's next for you?
Yeah. If they want to learn more about my fiction work, they can go to mattydalrymple.com, and that's Matty with a Y, Matty. And what's going on there is next month in January, my fourth Lizzy Ballard thriller will be coming out. And if they would like to find out more about my nonfiction platform, they can go to theindyauthor.com, and that's Indy with a Y, Indy. And I would love it if I could see some of your listeners over at the Indie Author podcast.
Okay, so y'all heard the invitation. You know we don't really go like, oh, please do that. They just gone over there and listen to some stuff. It's good. I'm Winona and I'm one of the And I Thought ladies, and you can find out everything that your ladies are up to at www.andithoughladies.com. While you're there, go down to the middle of the page, not the bottom of the page, but the middle of the page, and you can see the charities that we proudly support. We ask that you take a little time, or maybe even just a little wisdom, and give that to them. But if you can do that and give them some finances, because it's the end of the year, we're rounding up that charity giving, we would thank you in advance for that. Remember that wisdom is all around you if you're open to finding it and accepting it. So peace and love, you guys, from Winona and the Missing Jade. Oh, yeah. Thanks for listening.